In this second video, we'll look at Clinton's domestic policies in his early years, from 1992 to 1994. Once in office in 1992, Clinton balanced liberal and conservatives in his cabinet, most notably appointing a number of conservatives to economic positions. He also notably appointed the first female Attorney General, Janet Reno, shown on the left here, and later the first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, shown on the right. Clinton was fortunate to have two Supreme Court appointments early in his presidency. When Justice Byron White retired in 1993, Clinton appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you can see this on the top, who became the second woman on the Supreme Court, with Sandra Day O'Connor having been appointed by Reagan. The following year, in 1994, when Justice Harry Blackmun retired, Clinton appointed Stephen Breyer, shown on the bottom right here. Both Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer's appointments moved the court a little bit, at least blunted the movement of the court rightward. These two were considered more liberal. Once in office, the big issue was the budget. And Republicans were not in a compromising mood, and with Democrats controlling both houses of Congress, what ended up happening was the Democrats passed this Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1993, and not one Republican offered support. And what this law did was it decreased spending and raised taxes, which in time helped indeed address the debt. It, however, infuriated Republicans who wanted more spending cuts and no new taxes. Here you can see a graph of the national debt, and you can see how it had gone up during the Reagan-Bush years, but began to trend downward during the Clinton years. By 1998, the nation had its first budget surplus, its annual budget surplus, since the 1960s. While Clinton undoubtedly tried to take credit for the declining national debt, and indeed, as I say, the Budget Reconciliation Act of '93 was important in that regard, most of the reason for the declining debt was the booming economy during the 1990s. So you can see the unemployment rate coming down here in this graph. This booming economy was due in large part to growth in technology and computers, with the invention of online businesses flowing out of the new but still developing internet. And this is discussed in another series of videos on the culture of the 1990s. The sudden explosion in new internet companies led to a lot of venture capital pouring into new ideas for companies, as you can see above. The tech-heavy NASDAQ stock index, shown below, skyrocketed. Inevitably, however, this led to overexpansion, a stock bubble, which popped in late 2000. You can also see this, quote, dot-com bust, unquote, in both these graphs as well. The sudden decline in the stock market took place as Clinton's term was ending, and it hurt investors more than causing a full-fledged recession. In any event, the economy remained strong throughout the 1990s and Clinton's presidency. A looming threat as the economy boomed was healthcare. Ever since World War II, most Americans had gotten health insurance through group plans private companies negotiated with insurance companies. In these plans, the employer and the employee both paid part of the cost. With the growth of medical technology and science, however, medicine can do more things, but it costs more as well. Insurance companies, having to cover more, raised rates, and, in time, facing these higher rates, some companies decided to drop insurance coverage for their employees. These now uninsured employees could not afford insurance on their own and often avoided preventive medical care, only showing up in emergency rooms in bad shape, where the hospitals were required by law to treat them. The hospitals would, in turn, pass the cost of treating these uninsured people on to those who had insurance, those insured patients who came to the hospital. Now, this, of course, caused additional costs to the insurance companies, who then raised their rates for the employers and employees. More companies subsequently would drop their insurance coverage, it all creating a vicious cycle that kept getting worse and worse. Here you can see a graph of national healthcare expenditures per person from 1960 to 2010, and note the big boom here from the 1990 to the 2000. By the time Clinton was elected, 20% of the American population lacked insurance. And so what he did was he appointed a task force led by First Lady Hillary Clinton to sort of propose a solution, find some way to see if they can get to universal health care insurance. Now, he got a lot of criticism, nepotism, and appointing a First Lady, but keep in mind that Hillary Clinton was an accomplished lawyer. And the Clintons' task force met in secret, which also engendered a lot of criticism. When they issued its report, the task force rejected a single-payer system, which many liberals wanted, but rather proposed a health care plan based upon the extension of employer-based health insurance. Individuals not insured by employers would be insured by the government. The plan would also expand the government's regulatory role in a concept known as managed competition, with the government setting a minimum level of health benefits that each plan would have to provide. It also prohibited insurers from charging different rates for customers based upon age and pre-existing conditions. Of course, some of these requirements were later incorporated into Obamacare. Clinton made health insurance his major domestic initiative, but the insurance companies figured that they would have to face higher costs, and so they fought back, really flooding the airwaves with advertisements. And the most famous one was one entitled Harry and Louise, which showed a couple saying that the government bureaucrats would be controlling their health care and costs would be going up. Meanwhile, the GOP, under an upstart arch conservative congressman from Georgia, Newt Gingrich, helped unite the party in agreeing not to compromise at all. Presented as a socialized medicine and defeat it. In the end, Gingrich's plan and the insurance advertisements, they worked. Clinton's plan was defeated. Hillary Clinton was an activist first lady. She said her role model was Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said things like, I could have stayed home and baked cookies and had teas when they criticized her role in the healthcare, the healthcare committee. But, she kind of insulted conservative stay-at-home moms when she said that. And so, a lot of social conservatives who value the traditional role of women in society saw her a real threat. And undoubtedly that played into the defeat of her healthcare plan as well. The defeat of the health care plan and the Republicans' failure to compromise sort of made Gingrich a rising star in the Republican Party. He was featured in a lot of newspapers and magazines, as you can see here. While Clinton's major health care initiative failed, he did get the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 passed. That was legislation that George Bush had vetoed twice. It guaranteed workers up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons, including pregnancy. And conservatives had said that this was too great a burden on businesses, and that's why they vetoed it. The healthcare battles and the battle over the budget had sort of defined the early period of Clinton's presidency. And, Clinton was a new Democrat, but many Republicans were arguing that no, he's a diehard liberal. Look at what he's done. This impression grew when Clinton signed the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993, the so-called Brady Bill. The Brady Bill was named for Ronald Reagan's communications director, you can see here on the left, who had been shot in the 1981 assassination attempt against Reagan. The Brady Bill provided for background checks on gun purchases. Now, whatever impressions his early actions may have given Republicans, the reality was that Clinton remained a new Democrat, frequently seeking compromise. With Reagan Republicans calling for more and tougher law enforcement, Clinton agreed to sign the Violent Crime and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. The law provided for more cops and additional punishments for crime, which Republicans wanted, but also included as part of the legislation a ban on certain semi-automatic weapons. Liberals had wanted this, and this was so-called the assault weapons ban. Another Clinton compromise was his famous don't ask and don't tell policy for gays in the military. In the growing cultural wars, the compromise angered both people on both sides. Many social conservatives did not want any gays in the military, and many of the gay people said that they have a right to serve in the military and shouldn't have to hide their sexuality. Now, the crime bill may have pleased police and many Republicans, but that assault weapons ban and Clinton's the Brady bill, it had really angered many gun owners in America, and it angered the a pro-gun lobby known as the National Rifle Association, often referred to as the NRA. Funded in large part by gun manufacturers, the NRA couched any regulation of firearms as a direct threat of the Second Amendment and assault on liberty. Its chief spokesman was the actor Charlton Heston, which you can see up top here on the right. By Clinton's election, an ardent and angry anti-government sentiment grew in many parts of the country, notably among Republicans. This more extreme fringe of conservatism occasionally led to violence. Just before Clinton's election, federal agents attempted to serve a warrant for firearms violations on a man who lived alone with his family in the Idaho woods, and this became known as the infamous Ruby Ridge incident. The man resisted, and a firefight with government officers resulted. A federal agent and 2 family members died before negotiations finally ended the standoff. Meanwhile, during the siege, critics of government argued that the agents had instigated the violence, and Ruby Ridge became an early rallying cry for more militant libertarians and gun rights activists. The following year, in early 1993, violence again erupted when federal agents tried to investigate charges that a separatist religious sect outside Waco, Texas, known as the Branch Davidians, were abusing children and stockpiling weapons. The Branch Davidians and their leader, David Koresh, resisted, and a long siege with federal agents resulted, over a month. In the end, federal agents stormed the compound, and the group apparently set afire their compound in a mass suicide. In the end, 76 people died, including 20 children. Critics of government argued that the federal agents had overreacted and should have left the group alone. Again, the Waco tragedy became a rallying cry for anti-government extremists. While people could argue over the culpability of federal government in these incidents, everyone was horrified in April 1995 when a disgruntled former soldier, inspired by the Waco tragedy, Timothy McVeigh, set off a gigantic truck bomb outside a federal building in Oklahoma City. The infamous Oklahoma City bombing cost 168 innocent people their lives and wounded almost 500. In Washington, politics remained caustic and often ugly as the Clinton years began to pass. Given the Whitewater charges and other charges of corruption against the Clinton administration by prominent Republicans such as Newt Gingrich, Attorney General Janet Reno agreed to the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the Whitewater affair. Meanwhile, one of Clinton's advisors, Vince Foster, killed himself in Washington Park in 1993, declaring his reputation had been ruined. The charges against Foster were unsubstantiated, but his tragic death illustrated just how harsh politics had become. Extreme anti-Clinton partisans even pressed conspiracy theories that the Clintons had killed Foster to hide evidence against them in the Whitewater investigation. When Reno agreed to have a special prosecutor appointed, a 3-judge panel had under the law the power of appointment, and it decided on former Republican Solicitor General Ken Starr. Starr was known as an ardent conservative and, in the coming years, would investigate every aspect of the Clintons' lives. This concludes the second video on Clinton in the early years, 1992-1994.